Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first episode of the InspHired webinar series. We're excited to have you here for this insightful lesson on leveraging AI for job searches. We'll be starting in a few minutes to allow everyone time to settle in. And while we wait, please feel free to say hello in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. Please keep your microphones muted throughout the session to minimize background noise. And if you have any questions during the webinar, you can drop them in the chat or the Q&A session. We'll address them during the dedicated Q&A portion towards the end. And yes, the session is being recorded and will be shared after the event.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we've given enough time for people to join us for this session. Girls, if you can hear me, just give me a thumbs up so I know I'm not having any technical problems like the last time. And if I don't see any thumbs up, I'm going to assume that I'm not audible. So please just let me know that you can hear me. My name is Landry Mutombo. I'm the founder and CEO of the InspHired Group, which includes our recruitment company in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Kinshasa. It also includes Verify Me Technologies and some of our digital platforms, InspHired Works and InspHired Connect. I want to thank everyone for joining. I know you could be doing something else, but you've taken the time out to join us, and thank you for coming on board with us. This is our first one, and hopefully we'll have the series grow over time. I want to thank my team. Every now and again, I walk into my marketing who has their mic on. Girls, will you mute the person who's got their mic on if they're not able to hear me, and mute? As I was saying, at times I walk into the marketing office and say, guys, I have this grand idea, or I want to do one or the other. And a lot of the time the team will indulge me. And this is one of those times where the team is indulging me in order to make this happen. What we're going to touch on today is we want to touch on some human elements. Then we're going to go somewhat in depth with the technology, so the machine, and then we'll try to bring it all together and give you practical tools for your job search. As a recruitment agency, we don't simply want to be client-facing and solve their problems, but we want to be connected to our community and helping people navigate the job market, even if we're not the direct beneficiaries thereof. That's part of our founding mission and vision, and I think it's important for us to do so. I did see a lot of inspired colleagues. I'm hoping you guys are here simply to encourage me and take notes for your candidates and not for yourselves. Let's get started. The first aspect I want to touch on is that your mindset is your strongest algorithm. In a world that's becoming increasingly more dependent on AI and emerging technologies and all of these things, the starting point cannot be the technology itself. So you have to remember that AI and other technologies are simply tools. And here at InspHired, we try to make a clear distinction between the tools we use and the humans behind them. And I think when you start your job search, you have to have a focus first to understanding your own mindset and coming into a job search with the right mindset. If you get that right, the likelihood that your job search is going to be better is also going to last longer is more likely. If you simply jump into a job search without getting your mentality right and understanding what you're going to encounter, the likelihood is you're going to be frustrated along the way because it's a difficult thing to manage. So let's get into that a little bit more. Mental wellness equals career strategy. I can't stress this enough. If you're between jobs or you're thinking about changing jobs, it's important to understand that, yes, you may click on the first application, apply and get hired, but that's very unlikely. In fact, I think if I asked all of us, how many times we've been rejected applying for jobs, I think everybody would have a story. So you need to understand that part of your career strategy and finding the next job, you've got to attach mental wellness to that. And that means surrounding yourself with the right people, reading the right stuff, staying away from things that are going to affect your mental well-being in a negative way. You may need to have a coach or somebody close to you who can help you along the journey. Very important. The other thing to remember is that your mindset will affect how you show up. I'm going to give you a story shortly, but if you think about consistently being rejected, every application you're sending through, you're not getting feedback, you're getting rejections, it's going to affect even a positive response. It may affect your confidence when you walk into an interview, the way you shake hands, the way you respond to questions, the way you present yourself. And obviously, you have to manage that so that when the opportunities come, you're ready to show up. Otherwise, it may cost you even opportunities that you want. The other thing you must do is to meet yourself before you meet the recruiter. And what I mean by this is you've got to know yourself, your boundaries, the kind of role you want to do, because we as recruiters and employers don't know you. We look at your CV and we interview you and we think about where you might fit into an organization. What's important is for you to know yourself really, really well and to be able to articulate your expectations and everything that comes with that better than anybody else. And that means how much you want to earn, with some room with all of these things, because you want to be flexible, but you must have an idea of who you are, what you're prepared to do, where you're prepared to go, if at all, for that next opportunity. If you don't know that, you're likely to be blown from one opportunity to the next and become one of these people that just applies to everything. And that comes with its own problems, including, the possibility that you might land on some sort of scam and so on. So you've got to be, the more sure you are about yourself and what you want, less likely it is that you're going to fall into some trap or other. The last thing I want to touch on here is that job search it's emotional, and rejection, burnout can really affect you. I watched this with somebody close to me in the last couple of years just go watched them leave a job, and they were confident that they would find another one, and they didn't want my involvement. And so I watched them apply and essentially sink into some form of depression, just not getting out of bed and so on. So you have to understand there's a real emotional aspect to being rejected, and you can get some sort of rejection and burnout in essence, where you're not keen on applying for any roles. One of the points in the research I did recently was just a growing number of applicants, and even when the job stats come out, it's something you should probably look into. Just how many discouraged job seekers there are out there. There are opportunities, but if you're not connecting to them and you're being rejected, it means you could eventually become discouraged. And then you're just not applying for jobs, and you're not participating in the economy, and that can long term be really, really detrimental. So it's important to remember that. And if we get this aspect right, I think it gives us a platform to move forward from. Uh, let's talk about job boards. Now that we've kind of unpacked getting our mind right and getting ourselves ready for entering the job market, it's important to look at where essentially you as a job seeker would collide with employers. And a lot of the time that's a job board. And we mustn't make the mistake of thinking again that simply applying on a job board is a strategy, because it's not. First thing is that a lot of jobs, the majority of jobs globally, are not getting advertised online. So yes, a huge part of them are, but some aren't, which means there may be an opportunity to network or other avenues in which to connect with a potential job, and we'll touch on that. You have to remember that even I'm assuming the team reads CVs in our office, but even when they do, I don't think we spend a lot of time reviewing CVs because we're always on a clock as recruiters, and even employers have a time to hire stat that they need to meet, and so we're always up against the clock. And in our environment, there are usually more applicants than there are opportunities. So needing to filter and move quickly is important. So we're not spending a lot of time looking at applications. And so it's important to be very clear in how your profile is set up and that it says exactly what you want it to say. The other thing to think about is, you know, in our context as Africans, and this is something that I'm hoping to explore in my research going forward, it's just how access and familiarity to technology and the lack of infrastructure on the continent is affecting us from reaching opportunities and from employers from stopping employers reaching us. So we may have to be creative and think about other ways to access opportunities without infrastructure and to make reference to the fact that not everything happens on a job board. And again, I want to emphasize that job boards are helpful, and you've got to think about technology and all of these things as tools rather than a strategy specifically on how to get yourself into the next role. Let's touch a little bit more now on the tech tools themselves. And I'm going to try and spend a bit of time here and share with you how they work and how you can get around them. You generally in most jobs and a lot more so abroad than here, a lot of companies are making sure you're meeting the bots before you meet them. And you have to know how to navigate this, otherwise you're going to struggle. So if you interact with most companies, including ours, the first place where you interact with a job is an ATS or an applicant tracking system. And we use these sometimes to not just to advertise positions and manage applications in the back end, but it's also a really effective tool to filter. And so you have to understand that a lot of the time, what you're engaging with when you first doing your job application isn't really a human being. A lot of the time, it's an ATS or a bot, and those things are going to essentially filter you out. Again, touching back on what's important to employers. And I think in some ways, recruiters as well, we want to be able to filter large amounts of data. So a lot of the heavy lifting that AI tools do for us as recruiters and employers is we want to disqualify as many people as possible, so we're left with a smaller pool of people that are potentially qualifying applicants for any position, and the ATSs do that a lot. And I've touched on how recruiters rely on shortlisting and essentially removing candidates who may not fit the spec. The other thing to think about is, and I don't know how many of you have engaged with this or, AI-based chatbots and video screening. When we first launched InspHired, we had a video recruitment platform that we had the opportunity to scale, and we specifically stayed away from it because we didn't want to excessively use tech. And in the Africa context, with algorithmic biases and all of these things that are built into AI, it can become problematic. So you have to think about when you're engaging with chatbots and when you get invited potentially for a video interview with a computer rather than a person, you got to think about how to navigate that so that it doesn't you don't fall prey to some of those biases. Let's get into some detail on those. This is really what you need to remember around common trends globally and how they may affect you. What I've listed here are essentially applicant tracking systems. What's important to remember here is that when you're applying, a lot of these tools will scan your CV for keywords, qualifications, and match your application to your CV to the job spec. And a lot of the time, humans are not involved in this process. I think those of you who may be using PNet or Career Junction, there are already and InspHired Connect we're building this functionality where the minute you upload a job spec, it will prompt you to specific applicants because it's already scanned their CVs and picked up keywords. This is really important if you want to be noticed and matched up to a position a lot more easily. So your CV needs to be very clear about what it is that you want to do and some of the tech tools that you use and some keywords within your industry, because a lot of the times these guys are the bad guys in an applicant world. They will reject you before a human being gets to see it. Right. So we've used smart recruiters in the past. Um, at the moment, we're using Recruit CRM, and they're very, very similar in how they manage. Some of them, like Greenhouse, for instance, do other things like schedule interviews and so on. So companies are using more and more of that to automate, so they can spend less on a bigger HR team to filter and all of those good things. So you've got to remember that. Next one I want to talk about are chatbots and virtual recruiters. Now, like applicant tracking systems will simply, you upload and you ask some questions and you respond to them, and that's all good and well. If you can navigate that. What you have to remember is a lot of the time, and a lot more African employers are going to be implementing some of these tools, like L'Oreal and Deloitte have already started with these things. Is when you're applying, whoever you're chatting to again is not human. So how do you navigate getting essentially past a robot so that your application is accepted and is then banked, right? So that's just another barrier before you reach a human being who's a decision maker, right? So you've got to really, really think about that. And when you're responding to things like AI, and I may touch on that a little bit with large language models and how they operate, how they think and reason before they respond to you. So you have to think about that. You may have to keep your responses short. You may have to clarify how you communicate. You can't simply assume that a large language model understands how you're communicating, like with ChatGPT and Claude and some of these systems that are being used. So you've got to think about how you're approaching and how you're talking to large language models and understanding how they reason. Right. Next thing I want to talk about is what we touched on slightly in the beginning, which is some video interviewing tools. I know locally there's a company that's been quite. We've even had some clients saying our candidates need to go through that process, and this is quite contentious. So if there's anyone who's actually been through a process where they've been interviewed via AI, 100% without a human being, I'd really like to get your thoughts behind this. Even at the time when we were working with video technology, there was always something that just didn't feel right about having a computer interview somebody and capture its responses and bring it back to us, because there are just too many nuances that you won't pick up. Now, from preparing for this, I found that there's a lot of contentions around the ethical use of video-based AI interviews, and so I'm not sure how active, and I think Wamley is the big guy doing this in South Africa. I think a lot of people may be uncomfortable with how ethical it is to have a system read my facial responses rather than a human being. Also countering that with the fact that human beings themselves carry biases when interviewing. So this is quite a contentious area. Personally, I would not accept a digital interview through some form of robot for any position. If I were to be approached for a job, this is certainly not a route I would go. But if you are going to go this way, then again, you've got to be prepared for lighting, facial expressions, all of these things, because the system is reading how you're responding. Hand gestures, you may have to prepare like I have for this webinar in order to come across in a favorable manner. You have to think about that. Moving on, and I think Yeah, matching and screening. All right. So here, the idea is to remember that candidates, for some roles, candidates may not even apply for positions, right? And we're going to touch on LinkedIn and why that's key. So what these tools will do is they essentially will scour for information and visibility before presenting those best fit candidates based on not necessarily candidates who have applied. So multiple job boards, your digital presence in essence, and then bring that back to a potential employer. This is good for finding, candidates that may not necessarily apply, and sometimes those can be the best candidates. So if you're thinking, I don't really want to be applying on job boards, then really what you want to do is you want to do more on LinkedIn and sometimes Facebook. I know that Facebook has been used to hire quite a bit. I know X, formerly Twitter, has been doing a lot developing hiring tools in the background. So if your social media, specifically LinkedIn, is really out there and discussing what you do and documenting your work and your success day to day, these kinds of tools, JobVite and Eightfold AI, would definitely be of assistance to you. I don't know how prevalent this is on the continent here, but certainly from my research, it's quite prevalent abroad in the US and other more developed territories. Locally, we spoke about Wamley, which is a video interviewing tool. Job Crystal, I've not had much interaction with it, although I know them from our interaction specifically with APSO. They're quite involved there, and obviously LinkedIn. And I want to emphasize just how important it is to be out there. And again, if you think about what your mentality is like during a job search, and the longer you go without finding employment, this can begin to strain your mental capacity to be out there, specifically on platforms like LinkedIn. But it's important to keep going and to keep connecting with other professionals, because even companies that don't have a lot of resources are using LinkedIn and some of these tools to find candidates a lot easier. All right, so let's move on. Those are just some of the prevalent tools that are being used out there within our industry and within our space. If we have a bit of time, we can maybe touch on um, just how large language models work and how you can leverage them. AI is your secret weapon. Now, it's this is also a bit contentious because I spoke to somebody recently and said, "Look, I use AI a lot of the time. I have Claude, I have ChatGPT Premium, and I use Grok as well from X, and there are lots. I'm sure you guys will share with me some of the AI tools you're using." And they came back to me and said, "Well, I don't really know how fair it is to use an AI large language model to your advantage." And my question was why? And the main thing they said was, well, it's not really authentic. It's not really you. You haven't really written that post, and you haven't actually thought that through, and it's actually somebody else's work, really. It's unfair. And my response to them was, well, we're also using things like Microsoft Word and even Outlook that correct our spelling, and even other tools like Grammarly that will rewrite your sentences if you haven't done them properly. So that's not much different from large language models. What you want to do is train your AI assistant, in essence, to become a version of you, or an improved version of you, when it comes to written communication and information you're putting out. So first step, what you don't want is to say, okay, and let's get into a basic prompt on ChatGPT. Hey, write out my CV. No, that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is, and this is something I practice all the time, you want to train your language model to understand who you are, and over time, it will have a lot more of your tone and how you are as an individual. For instance, I have uploaded my research papers onto onto my AI assistant, my profile, a lot of my thoughts, articles I've written. And so over time, it has so much of my data and my tone as an individual that I don't have to tell it more going forward. So in other words, um, I recently asked one of my AI assistants, "What do you know about me?" And it wrote me a two-pager, including uh, some detail that I had forgotten I'd given the language model. So what you want to do is maybe upload a version of your CV, some of the job descriptions and things you might have done before. And based on the information you give your language model, it'll be able to come back at you. And you may even be able to upload a potential job spec, right? And say, hey, this is what I've seen. What do you think, right? What you don't want to do is have a blank approach that says, well, I'm just uh, copying a response from my language model and sending it forward. That's the wrong way to do it. It has to become more you. In fact, even up until now, when I write material or when I'm working with my assistant, sometimes there's information that I don't like, and I'll have to say, well, no, I didn't like that. I changed the tone. I wanted to be more African based or more uh, I want more fun in the tone, right? Same with your CV. You've got to think about tailoring your AI tool to know you, and then making sure that on every application you're approaching it from a point of view of training it on those specifics, right? And you don't want to copy and paste. The other thing you can do is to ask your language model, depending on on the version you have, to really just go out there and search for who's posting what and which companies may be more suitable and what the best trends are out there, because it's going to be able to filter information and give it back to you in a practical way. Um, we could really spend a lot more time here, and maybe I'll come to this if we have a little bit of time later. I want to make sure we have time for questions before closing out. Um, moving on, some of the issues you may find, and you've got to think about this, um, when you're navigating your job search, there are a lot of fake job ads. And this is because, one, there are some, information and your personal information is becoming more and more important. And there's a lot of farms out there, data farms that are just farming information. And sometimes they upload it on a different platform, or they may um, they may even use it to try and extract personal information or put you on some sort of database where you're now getting calls and being sold and being spammed with sales. So you have to think clearly about the links you're clicking on. And what I always encourage is, if you don't see a clear company name, so if you were to see an advert posted somewhere and it's not on the job board, it's on a free platform or something that just doesn't look authentic, look up the company, whether it's the agency or the employer. Look them up, make sure they have a website with a contactable phone number, make sure you can reach somebody who's human, because a lot of the things that scammers won't do is spend a lot of time backing up their online scam with individuals in a place. But the other thing to think about is that if you're being asked for money in exchange for any employment service, absolute red flag, you should walk away. And you know, you have to also think that if it sounds too good to be true, and the salary just doesn't make sense and so on, you've got to double check that, because often if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so you have to be careful of that. What I want to add here is that you're always welcome to call our office and say, hey, listen, I've come across this position. And I do this with friends that are in the job market. I say to them, if they're um, if if they're looking for a role and they find something out there, they're welcome to send it to me. And at InspHired, we have a large network. We could always make a call or two for you and say, hey, we've seen this and that. Is it legitimate? Could we look it up? And we'll be able to assist you with that. we'll talk about trust and trust in technology and how that affects us and how we're engaging with our digital tools a little bit later. Right. So what really that talks about is there's a formula that some of our researchers come up with, is that the more familiar you are with technology, the more you trust it. And so the better you are and the more comfortable you are with technology, the more you trust it. The problem is, as Africans, as we're becoming more and more comfortable with technology, we are becoming more trusting of it. And a lot of the time, it leaves us vulnerable to scams. And we've got to be careful of that. I'm not going to touch on communication and ease of use. Let's move forward. Now, how do you practically go about um, putting together a system to find your next job? With all that in mind, what you don't want is an haphazard way of going about your job search. You must have structure. Um, when you're looking for work, really that becomes your job, and you what you don't want to do is applying for a job at any time of the day or night and as you feel like it. Set a schedule. At InspHired, we used to have power hours. I don't know if we still have those, but essentially it says that I'm blocking out 10 to 12 or whatever it is, and during that time, I'm doing my research. I'm applying to 10 positions. I'm doing a full cycle where I'm applying and I follow up and I connect. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit. You've got to do this because it'll help you with some routine, and it will also not just get set in you as the individual, but even with the people you're applying to, and how the algorithms are going to become really familiar with your schedule, and you may have specific prompts and reminders and job alerts for specific roles if you set your schedule correctly. And the other thing that is helpful is that um, if you're clear about your schedule, you're not going to be disrupted when you're in some sort of flow, when you're locked in. Because if you know, okay, for the first hour I'm doing follow-ups, then doesn't matter what happens during that first hour, all I'm doing is follow-ups and I'm doing my applications thereafter. There's less of a chance that you're going to be disrupted because you know that if you stop midway through a task, it may take you some time to refocus. So it's really important to have a focused hour or two or day and some sort of structure, however you see fit, thinking about your industry and your yeah, um, how you go about it in your personal life as well. You want to use tools. There are great tools out there, Google Sheets, Trello. I started using Notion as well to organize. Think about WhatsApp groups that you could get in, connect with in your neighborhood, in your industry, because a lot of conversations might be happening there, and maybe and a lot of companies, to try and save costs from recruitment, are encouraging their employees to refer other people. And if you're part of a network and you're being, referred, sometimes companies will actually pay money to their staff to refer a successful candidate. WhatsApp groups can help with that. I think sometimes groups on LinkedIn can do the same. You want to be a part of that, right? And just also make sure you're tracking everything, because the last thing you want to do is with us, a lot of the time we call candidates and say, hey, you applied to a position, and then they at InspHired, and they say, what position was that? Because they don't actually know why, because they're just applying to every role. Whereas if you have them really locked, you can say, yes, I applied to this role at InspHired last week. Yes, it's for this, that with this salary. That starts off the conversation just on a different level, rather than, oh yeah, just remind me where you're calling me from again. It comes across as unprofessional. Right. What do we notice and remember? I want to tell you a quick story. Even recently, we've been trying to find an IT intern, and I haven't been part of that process. The team's been doing that. But somebody who had applied for the position messaged me on LinkedIn directly, knowing that the role would have something to do with me, I think from the advert. And she sent me a message to say, hey, it's really good to connect. I've just applied for the IT intern role at your company, and I look forward to a favorable response. Now, she was screened by the team, and by the time I started interviewing, she wasn't part of the list. But I specifically went back to my team and I said, hey, did you see this person's application? Yes or no? And they were like, yeah, we saw her, but she just wasn't right for the position. Moral of the story is I remembered her name. And even if it wasn't her name, I remembered that there was somebody who'd applied, whose profile I looked at, and I thought this is a potential, who had reached out to me directly. So what you want to do is you always want to follow through in any application. If you think about the fact that most recruiters are getting hundreds of applications to roles at times, even if you're a suitable candidate, your enemy is the quantity of applications. It's not practical for us to always go through every single applicant in detail. Sometimes we just don't have enough time. So if you're calling in, or you're responding, or you're connecting on LinkedIn, now you're connecting with a human being and we know you exist. It's very, very, very important. If I was looking for a job, every single application I sent would be followed up by a phone call trying to reach the responsible person. Now, that can annoy some people, but when you're in the business of finding work, being annoying somebody or a gatekeeper shouldn't be something that bothers you. You want to be clear that you want to reach the decision maker and that their CV is on your desk. Post that, you want to make sure your CV is well aligned, simple. And I think in the weeks to come, join us with the other webinars where the team will touch more on that, what you can do, but you want to make sure that that's good. We spoke about following through. It's not just a major trust signal, but it burns your name into our minds, and we remember who you are, which is really, really important when we're going through this. And then lastly, it's important to be visible on LinkedIn. I've seen some trends recently that have been really wonderful, where people are making little figurines of themselves, action figures, and they're putting them out there. You got to constantly be showcasing your skills on LinkedIn and in visible ways, even WhatsApp and so on. You don't simply use it for entertainment. Use it as well at times to really push your skills. It's going to help you be noticed, and sometimes that'll make the difference. All right, the last bit before we take questions for the last 15 minutes. Let's bring it all together. Um, you want to you want to plan it like a campaign, and marketing people know what I mean. You've got to have a clear idea where you're going, what message you're putting out, what tone, what tools you're using, and then you want to obviously apply and review, make sure it's organized. You want to use tech, but you want to make it personal, and that may help you if you're using an AI language model in order to train it, make sure it's bringing your best foot forward, right? Because that's what we're doing, using it as a tool. Um, and you want to be findable, be human, and consistent. Very, very, very important. Um, Findable means just be out there, showcasing your skills. Being human means you don't really want to be you want to be relatable. Uh, at the end of the day, recruiters and employers, all of us are human, and we want somebody we can relate to because we're going to have to work with you. And so we want to be able to relate to the human aspect of you, and you want to be consistent, because the reality is you may be applying for a while before you have results. And if you're tracking it and saying I've done 10 applications, I've had 5 interviews, then you're doing something right. You're doing 10 applications, no interviews, then okay, maybe something's going wrong. Maybe you're applying for the wrong positions or your follow-ups and so on. So you want to be consistent, but you want to use the right tools to do that. All right, moving on to essentially the end of our webinar. One thing I remember from my early days of job seeking, I always tried to carry myself as though I was already in the position that I was looking for. And this is where, as we close and we have a bit of a call to action, what I want you to remember is to show up like the hire before you're hired. And that means that in your own mind, you're already visualizing that you're in the position, you're dressing accordingly, you're spending time with people that are in that space. And in addition to that, you want to be really confident when you come through that this is a role that that you can do once you have the opportunities to be in front of somebody else. So our call to action is clear. Make sure your mindset is right, and we've touched on that. Understand the technology that sits between you and your potential next job, and make sure that your potential employer can trust you. And a lot of that comes in how you show up and your approach to the interview process, which I think the team will touch on a little bit more later. I'm Landry Mutombo. My contact information is right there. You can pop me a mail, visit our website for more information. I want to thank you for your time and for joining us, and I'm happy to take questions. If there are any girls in the chat, please will you read them out, or we will take questions for the next 10 minutes and then wrap up.